In News Talk, news and views beyond the mainstream media.
Did you know that the water you're drinking may contain over 2,000 different contaminants? From hormone-disrupting and mind-altering chemicals like fluoride in pharmaceuticals to newly emerging contaminants like radiation and other hybrid chemicals that water treatment plants don't screen out of our drinking water. PureEffectFilters.com has a breakthrough filter solution to effectively reduce the widest range of such contaminants, including the radiation coming from the Fukushima disaster. In addition, the filters will also revitalize your water by releasing natural minerals and electrolytes while increasing pH and antioxidant levels. Safeguard and revitalize your drinking water today with a breakthrough Pure Effect water filter system. Visit PureEffectFilters.com to learn more or contact us today at 1-888-891-4821. That's 1-888-891-4821 or visit PureEffectFilters.com to learn more.
You're listening to the Earth Needs Rebel Show, live from Dublin, Ireland, with your host, Kevin Bull. Join the rebels at freethinkingvoice.org. Apply to take the Rebel platform by emailing the rebels at the Earth Needs Rebel Show at freethinkingvoice.tv.
The higher you build your barriers, the taller I become. The farther you take my rights away, the faster I will run. You can deny me, you can decide to turn your face away. No matter, 'cause there's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it. Though you're doing me wrong, so wrong. You thought that my pride was gone. Oh no, something inside so strong. Oh, something inside so strong.
Hello listeners, welcome to the Free Thinking Voice, the Earth Needs Rebel Show, broadcast on Orion Talk Radio from Tonawanda, New York, 1650 on the AM, global on the internet, and don't forget your TuneIn radio feed, tunein.com to get your free software, which once installed on your portable device, be it your mobile phone, or your tablet, or your PC, or your notebook, you will then be able to tune in your favourite alternative radio stations anywhere in the world, hopefully Orion Talk Radio, and once you have, you just launch your app, press your favourite, and you can listen in the background of your other applications at any time. The beauty of tuning, it's a great new feed, it's growing fast, but also it doesn't drain your batteries, and that matters with your mobile phones, folks. As you know, there's nothing worse than finishing up with a flat phone because you've got an app that drains it, and this one doesn't, so it's a great new app to be able to use that way. Now, we've had a few technical issues getting on, slight delay there getting on. We're dealing with them now, and it won't interfere too long in getting the show fully on the road, folks, but we are recognising a few technical issues in Dublin, and I should hopefully be able to bring on another system to overcome this very, very shortly indeed. And if you can just bear with us while we are doing that, because we've got a full show this evening on borderline personality disorder with Professor David Allen. This is episode 2, and we're going to get a chance to pick up on an awful lot once we go with the show on this. Just waiting for an audio check with Katie Research. Is audio quality good? The audio quality is good enough to go, folks, so we're going to go with the show as we are at the moment. I'll just have to now bring a rather surprised Dr. David onto the show, because he's not going to realise he's going onto the live show. Just give me a moment, folks, while we do this. He's a great chap. He's got a great sense of humour as well, as you'll find out when we cut episode 1 a little while ago. And if you want to pick up on the previous episode, it's in the chat. Katie Research is putting the archive edition in the chat now for you folks to link up with the last episode, so that you can find out all about Dr. David Allen and really what he's like. I'm just having a little bit of juggling here to get this all going. And before I do, I'm just going to explain that for archive purposes, today's live show is, in fact, Tuesday, the 10th of September 2013. That's Tuesday, the 10th of September 2013. We will now try and link up to our good Professor David Allen and see how we do. And I'll explain to him that he's coming onto the live show as soon as we connect to get around the technical problems, folks, which shouldn't be long. It shouldn't be long at all. Let's see how we do. Fingers crossed that Skype's going to be from Dublin to the US on this. Hello, Dr. David Allen. Are you okay? Are you receiving me okay over there?
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. Great.
Oh, that's great. We've come straight onto the live show, as we've had a few technical issues coming online, but they've been solved. So I brought you straight onto the live show, just to let you know. I must say, it was a tremendous interview we had with you last time, which I thoroughly enjoyed as well. I love psychology anyway, as you know. It's a great subject, but our listeners have also found it fascinating. I was explaining to you offline, because, of course, it gives a lot of answers. It's a complex subject, but there's a lot of answers once you understand the complexity of borderline personality disorder. And you're the first person expert to come on and really explain it to us, which is a great opportunity. And I can also tell you that it took off as well in the European station from Dublin on the Blog Talk on Three Thinking Voice Radio, equally well as it did on Orion. So, you know, it is interesting having someone to actually come from your area, BPD, which isn't always that well understood and sometimes confused, as we found out during the last episode. But welcome.
I have to have a disclaimer that mine isn't necessarily the conventional wisdom.
I know, but the point is that if we can get everyone's expert views onto the platform, then the listeners get a chance to work out, rather than one size fits all. We tend to get this with mainstream media a lot, where we told whatever the angle is at the time, or shall we say one size fits all as a concept of views, whereas doing it this way, we get the full width of views on this, which I think is a lot more useful, because what they're saying has so much to add to the overall picture for people to understand this, you know. And particularly people that are struggling with it. It might be someone that's struggling with BPD, or it might be someone that's in a relationship or got a family member with BPD. It just adds to that understanding, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Now, we deliberately steered clear of going heavily into DSM-5 and diagnostic criteria last time, I know. And we'll try and probably put it to the background during a lot of this. But what would be really useful is to perhaps look a little bit further into your experiences and what it's like for patients with BPD, and also look at it like what it's like for people working with patients with BPD as family members and things like this, because it's quite a challenging disorder. I think the listeners will have got that from the last episode on this, but its complexity lends it in such a way that the more you talk about it, the more there is you need to say. I think that's the picture with BPD, because it is so complex, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The DSM criteria, it's a Chinese menu kind of a thing, where there's 9 different aspects of it, and you only have to have any 5. But you can have any 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, and it turns out there's way over like 200 combinations. So it's not exactly a single disorder. Plus, once you qualify for the diagnosis, you probably qualify for at least 1 or 2 other DSM personality diagnoses, not to mention all of the other psychiatric problems like anxiety and mood disorders that tend to go along with it. So it's almost an infinite variety of differences. But we have to start with some generalizations, so we have a starting point. People don't like to be typecast, and I've been accused of sort of stereotyping it, but my attitude is that stereotypes can be a useful starting point as long as you don't take them too seriously and you're open to new information that might change your view of what is going on in a given case.
Yes, I think opening it that way, where you're starting from a point of view of the complexity, I think would expand this more, because, like you're saying, some of the features of BPD could be, if taken out of it, would be standalone diagnosis in other areas, because it features so many facets of psychology and psychiatry within it, doesn't it?
Yeah, some are symptoms and some are behaviors, and there's just sort of a variety of things. I mean, they used to put personality disorders on a whole separate category called Axis 2. The new DSM decided to do away with that so insurance would cover it. And, since they don't want to, the DSM people don't want to talk about what causes anything, which is strange. In psychiatry, we have a book of diagnoses that leaves out causation entirely. But, because our knowledge of the brain is still pretty rudimentary at this point, there's certainly an argument for talking in terms of syndromes and not necessarily attributing any causes, although we all have our own opinions about the different disorders.
I know DSM-5 is controversial by everyone. Everyone is finding DSM-5 an issue, and including the writers of DSM-4. I understand.
DSM-4, yeah. Dr. Alan Francis has been one of the biggest critics of the.
It's unusual, but I don't think he's done any justice at all, because obviously, I think DSM-4 probably got more in the right direction than DSM-5, and everyone's looking at it as a step in the wrong direction in many ways.
Well, it really isn't all that different. I was really shocked when I got it, how little. I mean, there's a few things that have changed, but almost everything is pretty much the same as it was. I didn't think there was any need for it, since we don't know that much about causation. But that was just my opinion. In fact, I used to belong to a personality disorders research group, and they've been arguing for years about, instead of having a category, we should rate personality by different aspects or dimensions, and they were going to change it and get rid of some of them, and it was going to be completely different. And then when the book came out, they didn't change anything, and they put all the differences that we talked about in a separate section in the back of the book, which nobody's paying any attention to. And I was like, whoa, what?
I think they're playing it safe.
All that arguing for nothing,
Yeah. Well, the thing is, where causation is concerned, I mean, this is my view only, not you're an expert in this, obviously, but if we knew more about causation, then we could exercise more prevention in the way we are educated, in the way we handle children and everything else about it. So causation from that point of view seems important to get a degree of it. I don't know whether you feel we need some understanding to try and prevent.
Well, yeah, I do. I mean, there's so many aspects. There's a biological aspect, a psychological aspect, and a social aspect, and that's where everybody gets into these big arguments. Is it a brain disease, or is it a conditioned response? I have my own ideas. After dealing with them for as many years as I have and finding out what's going on in the family, which they don't necessarily volunteer to typical therapists, and you start seeing the same themes popping up over and over and over and over again. And you see that they exert a certain amount of control of behavior, which they're often not given credit for. I have my own very strong ideas about what causes it. Of course, there's a biological aspect to it, but there's a biological aspect of all human behavior, because it all involves the brain. It's a biological aspect of me having this conversation with you. That doesn't mean it's a brain disease, though. And there's some people who don't think there's any such thing as a brain disease, and I think that's equally bizarre. But again, for purposes of saying where I'm coming from, I do not think that personality disorders, even though it can affect the stress response syndrome, I don't think it's a brain disease. I think they're conditioned behaviors that people learn, and they're very adaptive in the families growing up. But when they get older, they're not always so adaptive.
Well, would you probably view it from the point of view that, for instance, if we look at stress effects and things like this, obviously we get a variation in people in how effective their HPA axis is, how much stress they can handle. So if you've got someone on a slower end of this in development, possibly do you think they might be more prone to a lower level of effective matters around them during childhood, producing a quite dramatic effect in BPD when they go through it?
Well, sure. I think some people are going to be more prone to it than others. But again, just because you're born with a certain amount of reactivity and trauma sensitivity doesn't mean you can't learn coping skills and be perfectly okay. But there's a lot of evidence that childhood trauma, which is a big factor, I think, in borderline personality disorder, leads to some permanent effects in the response of the glandular system and the central nervous system. And the question is it reversible, though? And I don't think that's been answered. Obviously, it's not easy to reverse, but I've heard that there is some preliminary evidence that at least some of these things may be reversible. Again, there's an awful lot we don't know. People forget that the brain has something like 10 billion neurons, each with about 1,000 connections, and that the connections are constantly changing. So you can see a computer motherboard going wrong, and you can't figure out what's wrong with this, but that's hardwired. The brain's not hardwired. The neural connections get strengthened, they disappear altogether, they form new ones all throughout the lifestyle. And we didn't know that a long time ago, but now it's pretty clear that those things are constantly going on. So it's sort of like a computer that's not hardwired and being affected to different stresses and environmental impacts. It's a wonder the brain functions at all. In a way, because it's so complicated. So people that say, well, you don't have any biological markers, so there's no such thing as mental illness, are very naive, because you wouldn't expect it's a disease of neural circuitry, probably in a lot of cases, if it's a disease at all, and not just the conditioned responses to environmental contingencies. And we can't trace individual synaptic pathways very well. We're just starting to learn how to do that. So again, it's easy to get into arguments about the relative strength of effects of biology and psychology and family systems and the culture, but I think we got to look at all those things. And for different disorders, there are going to be different balances, but they're all going to be involved in everything.
I can't agree with you more. Looking at all of the things is vital. In your book, your latest book, which is How Dysfunctional Families Spur Mental Disorders, that's what you're doing, isn't it? You're considering it as a psychiatrist, as a consultant psychiatrist and teaching professor, you're actually considering the psychological aspects at the same time, so you can really take grip of it. Why I think that particularly is good is that if we look at even the best neuroscience, if we look at the situation of the Are We Good or Evil, was a TV series I referred to before, which features Professor James Fallon as a professor of neuropsychology from California State University. It also features Professor Robert Hare, and it is an excellent program on neuroscience. But, of course, in that program, it was found that Professor James Fallon, in the testing that they did of criminal psychopaths, they all chucked their brain scans in as well to fill them out, and Professor James Fallon wasn't told what he was looking for exactly, and he identified all of the criminal psychopaths by neuroscans, but he had one additional brain scan and done the number of criminal psychopaths, and when they checked the ID, it was his own brain scan.
It was.
Yes, it's an incredible program. You'll love it. You must watch it.
But as I describe in the book, there's a lot of baloney about fMRI scans, because just because there's a difference, you don't know if it's a difference because the brain is training itself to perform in a certain way, and that is causing certain parts of the brain to be more active than in other people, or if there really is a disturbance or a disease going on. There's no way to tell. It's like if you're doing a Rubik's Cube, a certain part of the brain lights up. So I guess we could say that, doing a Rubik's Cube is a disease, because the brain scan looks different. Concert violinist, the part of the brain that controls finger movements, is larger. than average. So I guess we'd have to say that that's a disease too. London taxi cab drivers have very specific differences in a part of the brain called the posterior hypothalamus. So I guess driving a London taxi is a disease. On the other hand, you have something like schizophrenia where it probably is a disease. But again, you can't just tell from the fMRI alone, but yet people take that as evidence of a disease. So whenever you see a difference, it's automatically labeled an abnormality when they don't know that. It could just be a difference, not an abnormality.
Exactly. Now, in that series, believe it or not, it was staggering because in his family tree, he found out afterwards, he didn't realise at the time from his mother, it's all within the programme, that he had 9 murderers in his family tree as well. So we've got cross-generational psychopathy here. Obviously, it proves it's an excellent example of it. But in his lifetime, he had an excellent upbringing. This is what argues for your argument and what you're saying in the book, I think. He had an excellent upbringing, and he was very lucky. He became intellectual quite early because of the kind of upbringing and education. Everything was right. So he wasn't triggered into any of the resentment or hatred that could lead him into the direction of acting out psychopathy. So
might be more prone to that if he had. Yeah, there's very famous studies by a guy named Caspi that showed if you had a certain variant of a gene that controlled a certain chemical in the brain called serotonin, and you were abused, your likelihood of having certain kinds of problems skyrocketed. If you just had one or the other, you were more likely, and if you had neither, you were least likely. But there was, it's everybody who does this nature nurture argument gives lip service to that it's always both. But then when you get in the heat of the argument, that just goes out the window, and it all becomes one or the other. And that's, to me, is kind of nonsensical.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And the staggering thing, of course, in the program is that they also did the gene test, I believe it's gene tests, where they were testing for the warrior gene as well in psychopathy. He also had the warrior gene as well.
He had the warrior gene.
He had the whole works, And this proves, I think, the importance of psychology. Because if we ignore psychology, how can we explain how 2 people like that, like a criminal psychopath and a professor of neuroscience, can turn out so differently unless we can understand the psychology behind their function?
Well, yeah, and the same. I mean, sometimes you get that sort of the mirror image of that argument. People will argue that you get 2 twins, and one turns out to be a workaholic, and the other turns out to be a lazy bum. And somehow that isn't evidence that genes don't necessarily determine what you're going to go. But because they were raised in the same environment, that's automatically assumed that their environments were identical, as if parents treated all of their children completely the same, and that their experience doesn't diverge, from the moment you're born in your families. There was a comedy team that was big in the 60s and the 70s named the Smothers Brothers, and they were brothers, and their whole basis was the line, "Ma always liked you best." And obviously a lot of people identified with that. So to assume that 2 people that were raised in the same household have a shared environment is another one of those misleading things that biological psychiatrists
Absolutely. We're going into the first break. We'll be out the other side in about 3 or 4 minutes. But let's pick up on that exact point, because children don't get treated the same in families, exactly as you say. Let's pick this up on the other side of the break.
Okay. Thanks.
Real alternative radio. We are OrionTalkRadio.com.
Orion News Talk exists because the corporate news media has failed us miserably. Our media has been controlled for decades. In 1917, J.P. Morgan bought up or infiltrated the top 25 newspapers, and news control became reality. The CIA took over in the 1950s with Operation Mockingbird, recruiting over 400 journalists and news people, including Walter Lippmann, Edward R. Murrow, and Walter Cronkite. And today's top media figures are members of the Council on Foreign Relations, a group that at best is a think tank for foreign intervention, and at worst a proponent for the New World Order. The number 1 rule in journalism is to always follow the truth. The number 2 rule is no entangling alliances that prevent you from following rule number 1. So why then are corporate media members part of the CFR? And now today, 6 corporations control our major media, which is why more people are turning to us. So keep listening and tell a friend. Orion News Talk, news and views beyond the mainstream media.
IRN USA News, I'm Mark Thomas. Some of the world's biggest internet companies on Monday increased efforts to disclose more about their forced cooperation with U.S. spy agencies. Google asked the secret court that approved spying requests for a public hearing on their quest to reveal how many orders the company complies with. Facebook and Yahoo made their own first filings on Monday, seeking the ability to disclose more about the orders following Google and Microsoft filings in June. Google's new court filing adds to its earlier petition. It complains that its reputation and business have been damaged by what it says were misleading reports that the NSA had direct access to its internal servers. The companies have denied those reports. On Wall Street at the hour, stocks are higher in early trading, with the Dow up 100 points at 15,164. The Nasdaq has gained 21 points at 3,728. The S&P 500 is up 10 points at 1,682. This is IRN USA News.
Policies issued by American General Life Insurance Company, Houston, Texas. Not available in all states. For details, visit AIGdirect.com.
So I knew it was important to have life insurance to protect our family, but I was putting it off. But then yesterday, a girlfriend of mine asked me, point blank, what would happen if you lost your husband? How would you pay the bills? The mortgage, the car payments, food. And that's when it really hit me, and I realized I needed to get us life insurance right now. So I called AIG Direct, and in less than 5 minutes, I had a quote. I was shocked at how affordable it is. Just $18 a month for $250,000 of term life coverage. I feel so much better knowing the kids and I are protected, and my husband was so happy I got the quote.
Save up to 70% when you get term life insurance through AIG Direct. Call now for a free, no-obligation quote. It only takes 5 minutes, and you could save up to 70%. Call now, 1-800-463-7479. That's 1-800-463-7479. 1-800-463-7479.
Flawless Science believes you deserve the right to have a long and healthy life. You deserve to have toxin-free air and water and foods rich in minerals and nutrients. Factory farming, genetically modified foods, and thousands of environmental contaminants are polluting our world and stripping your right to healthy life away from you. FlawlessScience.com helps you regain these rights. FlawlessScience.com makes natural products and provides the best nutraceutical products to enhance your quality of life, your state of health, and well-being. So whether you're struggling with obesity, diabetes, hypertension, memory loss, allergies, high cholesterol, neuropathy, or to spice things up in the bedroom, FlawlessScience.com is here to help you. FlawlessScience.com ships quickly worldwide in discreet packaging and will never sell your information to anyone for any reason. For all your wellness, weight control, extreme muscle building, and nutraceutical needs, visit FlawlessScience.com today.
Extend your life with Extendovite.
Everyone around me seems to get sick but me. My brother got the flu twice. My mother was down with some sort of fever. People at work were taking sick days off, and others were just plain tired and run down. And me? Well, I just keep feeling great all the time with Extendovite. My grandfather used to talk about the power of garlic and other herbs he took that kept him healthy. I'm lucky. Extendovite was just what I needed to keep me healthy, and Extendovite is all natural. Extendovite was designed for the heart but does so much more by keeping me healthy all the time. I'll take Extendovite forever. Get your 2-month supply for only $69.95 plus shipping and handling. My name is Rick, and you can be like me just by calling 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendovite.
What's going on, man? This is Charlie B. reminding you to check out Charlie the Box every Sunday afternoon from 3 to 5 p.m. right here on Orion Talk Radio.
Let it all hang out, but you won't fool the children.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to Three Thinking Voice, the Earth Needs Rebel Show, broadcast on Orion Talk Radio from Tonawanda, New York, 1650 on the AM, global on the internet, and don't forget your tune-in radio feed. Live afternoon radio returns to Orion Talk Radio with Live Truth, hosted by Brian Lang. Brian brings a determined passion to broadcasting 6 days a week, Monday to Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. and Sundays 5 to 7 p.m. ET. Check your radio schedule and make room for Live Truth afternoons right here on Orion Talk Radio. Now, today, for a full 2-hour show, we have episode 2 on borderline personality disorder with Professor David Allen, who is kindly taking us into this. I'm finding it absolutely fascinating, folks, because it's an extremely complex disorder indeed, as you'll find out. And we started episode 1 just a little while ago. The details are in the chat, folks, so go to righttalkradio.com, go to the chat tab, the Earth Needs Rebels. All the details for Professor David Allen are there, and the last archive details, so if you want to go and listen to episode 1 and you missed out on that. But where we're going today is opening this up further with the kind help of Dr. David Allen as an expert in this to help us understand how complex it is and how important it is to understand the psychology behind this, as well as the psychiatric, shall we say, dysfunctions a person might feature as a result of this, which also can be variable as well. So the other side of the break, we were just taking it into the side of how family structures themselves can be very different. Even if you're from the same genetic tree, shall we say, and you're within a family of 2 or 4 children, the difference in the way you're treated in a family and your reactions to it can change things. And the best way to find out about what this can be like is to ask Dr. David Allen. So, Dr. Allen, do explain this to us in your experience. It must be quite a wide range of family structures you come across that sort of pre-event the time when someone might develop BPD.
Well, as I was saying before the break, some people argue that if you were raised in the same household, you have the same parenting, so therefore parenting can't have anything to do with the way that you turned out. And that doesn't recognize the fact that people with the same parents turn out very, very different, if not sometimes complete opposites, which would be awfully hard to explain genetically, but would not be very difficult to explain from a psychological standpoint. There was a family systems pioneer by the name of Murray Bowen who wrote extensively about the effects of sibling order, whether you're the oldest or the youngest, and how that leads to certain personality characteristics often because you're treated. Usually there's a cultural expectation. Like if you came from a traditional Chinese family, the oldest son would be expected to take over the family business, and if he would have preferred to have been a forest ranger, that wouldn't have been an option for him. But the youngest could go off and do whatever he wanted to. So they've done historical surveys, and they've said some of the leaders tend to be oldest children, and the rebels tend to be the sort of the younger children who don't necessarily. But in some families, it goes the other way. It goes where the younger child is favored. So it may turn out the exact opposite, where the younger child inherits everything, and everybody else is wondering, well, why is that person getting favored? And unfortunately, there's a lot of parents that don't discipline their kids and don't want to protect them from every possible negative, adverse outcomes and never expect anything out of them. And then they're always shocked when the kid basically doesn't grow up and spends all his time smoking pot in the basement playing video games. And that person could still have a brother who's out being a success. And then when it comes time for the parents to write the will, guess who gets everything? The irresponsible brother. And if the responsible brother says, well, wait a minute, why are you giving everything to him? The answer is, well, he needs it. You don't. You're doing fine. So in a way, he's getting punished for being successful. And people are complaining about how other people are in their families are enabling these people and are letting them use, they take all their money or steal from them even. If you look in the advice columns, because I kind of look at those, it's been a very frequent topic of conversation. I jokingly refer to them, I'm going to get in trouble for using funny names, but it's Freddie the Freeloader and Minnie the Moocher. who basically never grow up, and they're being supported by their parents. But if you look, there's a hidden side to it where the person that's financially dependent on his parents is sometimes actually taking care of the parents in other ways. So it's like a shell game of who's taking care of who. The story I talk about is one guy who was his parents refused to move out of a really, really bad neighborhood, and this guy was scaring the entire neighborhood because he was so crazy. He bought guns and dogs, and he seemed off kilter. He really couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag, but because he had this reputation, everybody left his family alone. So he was actually protecting them, but he was at the same time stealing money from them, and all the family thought that he was so terrible. But of course, the parents would leave the money out for him to steal. He'd use their credit cards, and they never took him off the credit cards. So when you look at that, you wonder, see, again, as I mentioned, I think in the first episode, I get more interested in the parents' behavior than in the behavior of the person that's acting in such strange ways, because it all starts to make sense why they're doing it. But that just kicks the question down. Well, then why are the parents enabling their kids to do that? So we have to sort of look at that. So Mary Bowen looked at sibling position, but sometimes it isn't just sibling position. Obviously, one kid is picked out to be it, I like to say, and he's the one that sort of is the focus for all the family problems. And it could be because he's in the same sibling position as one of the parents, or because he reminds the parent of grandpa, or because he is the most sensitive. In borderline personality disorder, where families, the parents are often very conflicted about having children at all. They think it's the end-all and be-all of human existence, but on the other hand, they seem to hate it. So they'll tend to focus all of their craziness on one kid, giving that kind of double message, I need you, I hate you, and it's up to the kid to determine exactly how to respond to that in some way that keeps the parents from sticking their heads in the oven. So why does the parent pick that kid? Well, again, it might remind them of their mother or somebody else, or because they're more sensitive. If you have a conflict over raising children and you have a very easy baby, then you're okay. But what if you have a colicky baby? Well, then all your insecurities rise to the surface, and you start getting more anxious, and anxiety is contagious. There's a whole literature called the attachment literature that shows this in very detail. I think it's very scientifically sound, that the parent's response determines the sort of the attachment behavior of the child almost for the rest of their life, although I think it can be changed, obviously.
I'm sorry to interject, but if we look at it, and particularly interested in the attachment theory, we're looking at birth bond here, and if we look at mum in the situation, because mum's relationship is very, very important, and we look at it from that point of view first, and we have a mum, shall we say, there's going to be different situations. I'm painting this on the back of everyday observations that people see. You see bias or preferences in families where mum might clearly demonstrate a bias towards one sex of a child, or it might be the first child, the firstborn child, or the firstborn child of a sex. And these sort of things people recognise in every day without looking at psychology or psychiatry to answer it. But that is something that happens, that a mum can bond with a first child, and it seems like it becomes exclusive if we're not careful.
Well, and it's amazing. Everybody knows that, but except for therapists, seem to have forgotten it. It's like I don't understand that. They just seem to think, well, maybe when you're 3 years old it affects you, and the old psychoanalysts believe that your personality was fixed by the time you were 5, and how the parents treated you after that didn't matter anymore. You were fixed. Of course, if that were true, then it wouldn't do much good to go into psychoanalysis, because that wouldn't have any effect either.
It wouldn't matter if we were in a plane crash or anything like that, because it wouldn't affect it, would it? It's
already determined and it's fixed.
It's not as hardline as that, is it? It's much more complex doctrinality, isn't it? And I think your book's revealing this as well in this, to point out. I think if you do a search for how dysfunctional families spur mental disorders, Dr. David Allen, you really ought to get into this and you'll find out a lot more. But can I ask you, is there any particular websites to link up with you, or is there any particular email address or anything like that you'd like to give to listeners to hook up with you?
Well, I have two blogs. One's sort of my own personal blog. That's make sure I get it right. It's to be I have one on psychology today called The Matter of Personality, and walking on the address in the other one for some sort of reason, but I get it right up here. It's davidmallenmd.blogspot.com. And my email address is dallen, ALLEN 49 @comcast.net.
That's great. Also, if you're picking up this and you haven't had a pen at the time, just go to the chat on oriontalkradio.com. Go to the chat and the Earth Needs Rebels chat. Chat, and you can then in there you'll find the information on Dr. David Allen as well, so you can pick up on how to hook up with him, and his publication, everything's there as well. So you've got a second option if you're driving around, you're not got a pen or whatever. I know it happens with listening to the radio, so you don't need to miss out that way in hooking up with Dr. Allen. Now, you're explaining the situation of how families, even within the same structure of the same family, could have a situation. If they have, say, 3 children, they could have 2 children that come out pretty well okay, but they have one child that doesn't. And that is because of the differences in the interactions in the family unit. And they are important, aren't they, to family structure?
Well, I think they're extremely important. Most people who have children or who have siblings intuitively know that they don't treat all of their children alike, and their parents didn't treat all of the siblings alike. Even identical twins aren't necessarily treated exactly the same. And by the way, even identical twins, when the brain forms and the cells migrate to form the brain, in identical twins, the patterns of migration are completely different, even in identical twins. So right from the minute of conception, practically, the differences start to emerge and can lead to different behaviors. And, you always hear these studies of twins that didn't even know about each other, and they both love the color red, rosé wine, and are both married to women named Flo. But those are kind of minor details. They don't really talk about self-destructive behavior, which I don't think. We're all inherently capable of self-destructive behavior, but I think that is more determined environmentally and in neurologically intact people than just, whether you like blue suits and not white suits. It's a whole different level of behavior. And these things are so often conflated and mixed up as if they're the same thing. Our field has got a lot of, we were talking about this earlier, a lot of dogmatism on all sides that really isn't warranted, considering all the variables that we have to deal with. But having said that, doesn't mean we don't know anything, because I think we know a lot. Most of it. It's supposed to be through observation, because we can't read minds, so you can't do a double-blind study on like psychotherapy outcome, because that would have to mean that the therapist wouldn't know what he was doing, which wouldn't be a very good test of the treatment. So because we have this limitation, some people say, well, psychology can't be a real science. But I think that's a very narrow definition of science, because the first step in the scientific method is observation. And if you see the same things over and over and over again for years and years and years in a variety of different contexts, and you can't explain them away because of other factors, that's evidence to me, and very strong evidence.
I find it fascinating. I had a conversation with a professor of psychology recently on ADHD, and this is a factor on that as an area of that. And one of the points made was that it's so easy to, when we don't understand something from a psychological perspective, i.e. we can't get the avoidance and the different adaptions completely understood where they're coming from in an ADHD-type client, that we then can make the fatal mistake of turning around and saying, oh, well, this is biological, and writing it off over to the neuro side. And I wonder if some of that is actually happening, rather than your approach of really getting the grips of the psychology and getting a more of an understanding.
Well, at least in the States, they'll just ask very simple questions over maybe a half-hour evaluation. They won't even ask about what's going on discipline-wise in the home, for instance. And they'll do these symptom checklists, basically, which are all invalid, basically. They're all basically screening devices, which are designed on purpose to have a lot of false positives because they're designed to cast a wide net so we don't miss anybody through false negatives. So just because you score well as having a disorder on a screening test, it means you're more likely to have it than if you didn't score that way, but it doesn't mean anything to the effect that you have it. Like they'll ask you, do you have this problem sometimes or rarely, sometimes, never, often. Well, compared to who? So what might seem like I have it all the time to me might seem only occasionally to somebody else. I use the example of severe major depression or melancholic depression where there's something called psychomotor retardation where people are thinking and responding much more slowly, and it's pervasive. It's all day, every day. It doesn't go away. You can't cheer them up no matter what you do. But most people haven't seen somebody like that. So if they say, well, how often do you feel hopeless? They're not comparing themselves to that person. They're just comparing themselves to how they usually feel. So if they had an argument with their wife last night, they're going to score higher than if they hadn't. So they're using these tests as, quote, objective, unquote, evidence of a disorder, and the tests are completely invalid. There's a statistical term for this. I just came across it the other day. I won't go into it, but they're using sort of ordinal data as a ranking data as absolute data, and it's not. So the question is, like, compared to what? And it doesn't say, do you feel this way almost all day, every day? Even the common instrument for measuring depression in research subjects, something called the Beck Depression Inventory, doesn't distinguish between the clinical syndromes of major depression and dysthymia as they're described in the DSM. Because it doesn't ask that. That's the first question you have to ask. Have you had a period of at least 2 weeks where you're depressed almost all day, almost every day, where nothing basically could cheer you up? That's the first question you ask. And that question isn't on the instrument at all. So it's completely invalid. So when you look at, I'm getting far afield here, but you look at studies of antidepressants, and the placebo rate has been going up every decade. And I think the reason for that is because you're getting these professional patients. So the people doing the study get paid for every person they can recruit, and the subjects get paid if they get recruited. So they get a built-in financial bias to exaggerate their symptoms at the beginning of the study.
I understand where you're coming from. I'm getting a picture.
That didn't used to be the case 20 years ago. They were more careful back then. But so the placebo rates were going out, so the anti-psychiatry group comes and say, oh, antidepressants don't work. Well, there's a high placebo response. Yeah, they don't work in people that are just unhappy. Nobody ever said that they did.
And if you look at DSM-5 and reflecting back at it again, is it the way it's developing, the way things are developing is to, if you like, kind of oversimplify in some ways the type of need to ask questions, not to be looking for causation, not to be building the big picture as much, and to tend to go in there and classify people into larger groups like ADHD is the end result. ADHD is growing very rapidly as a diagnosis, isn't it?
Oh, it's like, I don't have exact statistics, but it's like tripled in several countries in the last. It's just starting to happen in England and Australia. But and the use of antipsychotic drugs in the diagnosis of pediatric bipolar disorder, something which is extremely rare in my experience, and usually involves actually psychotic kids that are delusional, is being applied to every acting out child that goes to see a child psychiatrist or a pediatrician. But in defense of the DSM, if you actually read it, it says you're not supposed to use it the way that these people are using it or the way that you're described. It says you have to evaluate the clinical significance of a symptom. You can't just take it at face value. And you have to do a complete biopsychosocial history to rule out other causes. There's a popular TV show in America called, actually it's a British show too, it's called Super Nanny, where they actually, it's a TV show, so who knows what they're showing and what they're not showing, but they actually go into the home and people come in with these complaints, and then when you see what the parents are actually doing when they have a camera on there 24 hours a day, it's not at all what you thought. And that's my experience. It's not the Truman Show, so I don't have a camera on these people 24 hours a day, but I've developed ways over the years of getting people to describe honestly what's going on, and then I've had their families come in, one relative at a time, to see if things are being distorted or if they're on the right track or if they're leaving out things. And that's the only way to really know. So anxiety can cause attention problems. Depression can cause attention problems. Lack of discipline can cause attention problems. Parents that let their kids stay up all hours of the night because they can't enforce a bedtime. Sleep deprivation causes lack of attention. There's a zillion causes, and all they're doing is asking about the symptoms without ruling out all these other things. And then they're putting them on very dangerous medication.
Exactly. It seems to be a shortcut to medication control, isn't it, really, rather than looking at it and including the client in what can you do about it yourself personally with a bit of help from a therapist. We are going into the news break in about, I think in about 20 or 30 seconds until 7 minutes past the hour, so I'm a bit late to put that on to you. I better put that to you the other side of the break, Dr. Allen. But it does seem to lead us all in the direction of Big Pharma as the answer to everything, and not developing ourselves on as a human race, that we try to do the best we can within our own generations as we develop forward, to me. But I'll put it to you the other side of the break at 7 minutes past the hour, my friend.
Okay, and it particularly applies to people with borderline personality disorder, to get back to that.
Certainly.
DependableVoice.com, the total solution, one-stop shop for your business telecommunications needs. Nationwide business class telecommunications services, providing voice and data, voice over internet, and hosted PBX. Dependable Voice is now offering the first month free for any voice over internet and hosted PBX services. Save up to 50% on your current phone bill and save thousands of dollars with no need to purchase PBX hardware. Hosted PBX and voice over internet services include free local and long-distance calling to the U.S., Canada, and Caribbean. Email to voicemail, follow me services, multiple visual call reports, dynamic auto attendant, advanced ACD and call queue, unified voice and fax messaging, and much, much more. Plus, get your first month free with a minimum 3-phone system. Call Dependable Voice today at 1-888-346-1085 or visit them online at dependablevoice.com. That's dependablevoice.com. Dependable Voice, the total solution for business telecommunications.
At Orion News Talk, we know times are bad. Ever since 9/11, a battle has been waging against we the people. Our Constitution is under attack. A clandestine war has been